Toronto FC are perhaps the greatest team to ever grace MLS. That is, at least, the general consensus of the soccer cognoscenti. Comparing eras is never easy, but the Canadians certainly have an excellent claim to such a prestigious title. And then, after cantering to an MLS Cup on the back of the wondrous skill of Sebastian Giovinco, prolific goals of Jozy Altidore, and driving midfield force of Michael Bradley, they then proceeded to improve in the offseason, acquiring the likes of Gregory while in to bolster a roster that did not suffer too many casualties whatsoever. It was assumed that they would again canter to an MLS title. Who would dare bet against the best team in the history of the competition that actually improved? But if early indications are to go by, perhaps it will not quite be the same plain sailing. More from MLS Multiplex. Initially, Toronto's domestic troubles were easily explainable. Their historic CONCACAF Champions League campaign was their sole focus of the early weeks of the season. No MLS franchise has ever won the competition. You couldn't have come much closer than Toronto did this season. A penalty shootout loss to CD Guadalajara was agonizing at the time, but on reflection, there is reason to look back at their CCL campaign fondly. Domestically, though, their international exploits did not come without impact. Toronto, with a heavily rotated side, they utterly rested all of their stars for the CCL, making wholesale changes for several MLS games, suffered 4 losses in their first 5 games. The only team they overcame was Real Salt Lake, and the run ended in a somewhat humiliating 5-1 hammering at the hands of Houston Dynamo. But those losses all had excuses attached to them, weakened teams because of the shifting priorities towards the CCL. No one really questioned the defeats, no one were really concerned by what they meant. And rightly so. At this early stage in the season, they meant very little. But then we come to Saturday's 2-2 draw with the Chicago Fire. While it still wasn't the full-strength Toronto and there were some after-effects from a grueling and physically demanding CCL final, to throw a 2-goal lead to a middling MLS team is inexcusable, especially for a team as experienced and competent as Toronto. And this, more than all other losses put together, is more concerning. The excuse of a weak team is no longer valid. Yes, fatigue still plays a factor and perhaps provides an element of reason for such a poor second-half slump, but this was a worrying second-half display from a team of which much is expected. Does that mean that Toronto are now suddenly in trouble? I doubt it. It is still too early to tell and they are still rediscovering their best form and fitness. Panic stations are a long way away yet, but the question is far more valid than it was prior to the Fire draw. Then, there were reasonable excuses. Now, Toronto FC does not have that same luxury. Their answer, instead, must come on the